Do you remember Darling in the Franxx? I do. But I sure wish I didn't. Seriously, I can't get this stupid anime out of my head. This stupid pink bitch has been living rent-free in my head for years because I loved her. I loved her and she disappointed me. For years, it has taunted my every waking moment because it could have been so good. It had all the right pieces there to be an incredible anime with memorable character designs and amazing animation and fantastic world building, but it just wasn't. As a huge fan of Trigger Studios in particular, this anime really hit a sore spot with me. From a studio usually so good at creating beautiful, masterfully written anime, and more importantly, sticking the landing, the failure of Darling in the Franxx really grinds on my nerves. Still, to this day! But how did this go so wrong? What caused this promising anime to crash harder than a Boeing 747? That's what we're here to find out. And hey, remember to like and subscribe while you're here because it really helps me out a lot and I super appreciate it. So let's get right into it. Why is Darling in the Franxx such a disappointment of an anime? We need to do a bit of a deep dive into this anime and go beyond just a surface level reading because Darling in the Franxx has a very strong start and an opening scene that immediately draws you right into the story, if you know what I mean. In fact, the entire first half of the series is pretty good. It has that same humor and charm that Trigger Studios is known for, along with some cool mecha designs and fights. The characters are fun and engaging with unique personalities, and it feels like there's something for everyone. It's a good mix of interpersonal drama and fun mecha fights, and even the love triangle plots shape up to be interesting explorations of the characters. I mean, some of them. And despite all the world building that they throw at you, a lot of the plot is based around the characters and how they interact with each other, both as pairs and as a squad. It's a very character-based story, and the mechs are just kinda there for really cool set dressing. But Trigger has something that I've deemed as the, quote, Trigger formula, and I think Darling in the Franxx tried a little too hard to live up to this. And yes, I'm referring to multiple works of Trigger Studios themselves, not just Evangelion. I've seen a couple other videos trying to compare the series to Evangelion in particular, and I think that's a really surface level take, when Darling in the Franxx is a lot closer to Gurren Lagann in execution and design. It takes a bit more of a serious tone than Gurren Lagann does, but the energy of the series is still trying to be very uplifting and heartwarming, rather than Evangelion's depressing, hopeless tone. And yes, I know Gurren Lagann itself was a response to Evangelion made by the same studio, but in this case, I really do think that Darling in the Franxx is specifically trying to base itself off the works of Hiroyuki Imaishi in particular, who is the founder of Trigger Studios that split them off from Gainax. So while I do think that Evangelion was a broad influence, as it is for most coming-of-age mecha stories, I'm going to look at this series through an Imaishi-style lens. Like, come on, the stupid 02 mech even uses a giant drill-shaped spear at the end. Anyway, the Trigger formula doesn't apply to every Studio Trigger series, obviously. This is pretty much only for works directed by Imaishi, who is the founder of Trigger Studios and the director of Gurren Lagann. And all of these series have very distinct directive styles. The essentials of the Trigger formula is that the characters start all the way at the bottom and they work their way up to the top, usually with the world growing exponentially around them as the stakes go dramatically higher and higher. Like a drill or a spiral, the plot continues to grow until it reaches a world-altering climax. The plot usually involves a normal, downtrodden person who deals with exponentially growing problems until they're confronting aliens of some kind. Yes, specifically aliens. It always involves aliens. Let's sum up a few of these series into their essential parts. In Gurren Lagann, you had Shimon the Digger, a boy trapped underground who eventually grows to become a Starfleet captain and stop psychic aliens from destroying the universe. In Kill la Kill, you have Ryuko, a new girl in town with nothing but a scissor blade to her name that eventually becomes a mecha girl in space and stops psychic aliens from destroying the universe. In Space Patrol Luluko, yes, this is kind of an anthology series, but it does still count. You have Luluko, a normal girl who gets unexpectedly shoved into the Space Patrol and eventually grows to become a confident Space Patrol officer and stop psychic aliens from destroying the universe. In Promare, you have Gallo, a simple firefighter who eventually pilots a mech with a twink and stops psychic aliens from destroying the universe. In Darling in the Franxx, you have Hiro, an empty husk of a guy who failed at piloting a mech, who eventually learns how to pilot an even better mech thanks to a cute girl and stops psychic aliens from destroying the universe. In theory, purely on paper, Darling in the Franxx should work as a trigger property. It has all the pieces there. Cool mechs, cute girls, cuck plots, but it just doesn't work. And I think it's because they purposefully tried to copy this trigger formula in a botched attempt to imitate Imaishi's style that the series ended up this way. Because Darling in the Franxx isn't directed fully by him. Imaishi only directed the action sequences. Darling in the Franxx is actually co-produced by Studio Trigger and A1 Pictures, notorious for, well, a lot of anime of varying levels of success and quality. But the series started off with a lot of promise, and I was absolutely hooked in the first half. But something about the later half of the anime really just fell off after episode 15 hard. And I know most people blame the Shinzo Abe approved side plot, but that's not the only issue. I mean, it's definitely a huge part of it, sure. The ending was rushed because they spent so much time on this pointless side plot with two characters we very suddenly pivoted to that had little prior development or narrative attention, other than an obsession one of the characters has with making a baby because that's a normal thing for a 15-year-old to want. But I don't think the ending would have worked no matter how much time they had dedicated to it. And in order to get into this, I'm going to summarize the second half of the series so you don't have to watch it. You can just happily stop the series at episode 15. Don't worry, you won't miss anything. I'm not going to go too far into my description of the first half of the series because overall, I honestly think that it stands really well on its own. But here's a rough summary anyway. Darling in the Franxx starts with Hiro, our hero, and 02, our heroine. Hiro is sad because he's too boring to ride a mech, so he hops on with 02, who has a lot of personality and is known for killing her mech partners. Awesome. But Hiro doesn't care because he gets to ride a mech and that's all he wants to do in life, so who cares if he dies afterwards? Then there's Squad 13, all kids assigned to ride duo mechs with questionable seating in order to save one biodome out of many biodomes from dying to Klaxosars, who are like alien monster dinosaurs that have a really good-looking color scheme. The series then delves into the mysteries of the world the characters inhabit, as well as what 02's mysterious past is and how she changes up the already fragile dynamics of Squad 13. There's a lot of other stuff that happens in the first 15 episodes, but most of it is contained stories about the mech rider duos learning to trust each other and work out their issues thanks to the catalyst that is 02, with a few love triangles thrown in for good measure. Then, most of the main personal plots converge and resolve with episode 15, where Hiro and 02 manage to actually connect with each other as Hiro learns of his shared past with her, as well as the source of her obvious trauma. And then he joins her in her mech to stop her from rampaging, confesses his feelings to her, and they joyously destroy a whole bunch of Klaxosars together. Hooray! Wait, is that a baby hand? Whoa, what's that doing here? And that's the most bare-bones summary I can give of the first 15 episodes. Seriously, you should go watch them. They actually tell a pretty good story, if a bit of an overdramatic one. If only there was a version of Darling in the Franxx that ended the series here. Now, I will agree that the first half of the series definitely has its problems, but it has intriguing world building and an engaging through-line story involving the mysteries about 02 and why she's so obsessed with Hiro. And it actually has a genuine explanation rather than simply going, oh, it's because he's just that special. It feels like a fully contained story with a fully developed beginning and ending. So that is such a powerful, uplifting, and emotional payoff, and then you go, wow, that was only the first 15 episodes. I can't wait to see what else they have planned for the rest of the series. And well, let me go into a little bit more detail for episodes 16 through 24. Episode 16 starts us off on a terrible foot already because 02 is now tamed and is just a nice, eccentric girl instead of a terrible monster woman. Awesome. Now I can imagine her kissing me and not eating me, which is somehow more preferable. Oh, right. Remember that baby hand from episode 15? Anyway, who cares? Oh no, Kokoro kissed Mitsuru? There's already way too many cuck plots for one anime fan base to handle. How could they introduce another one? Episode 17 continues and we get to see the Nines, who are cool and get absolutely zero screen time or development and serve only to be cartoon villains about pregnancy. Wow, wouldn't it be awesome if there was actually a version of the series where they actually mattered? Then there's an attempt at plot here with the Klaxosar princess, who is another absolute waste of potential, but the most important thing to us analyzing why this anime went so wrong, and apparently also to the writers, is Kokoro saying that she would really like to be impregnated. And then she, does Episode 18 is the worst. The gang holds a shotgun wedding for Kokoro and Mitsuru, and then they're both kidnapped and all the kids are brought to a place called the Bird's Nest, and we time skip to several weeks later where nothing has happened. Seriously, all the kids are literally just sitting around in a circle, and then Kokoro and Mitsuru come back and oh no, they have their memories wiped. Isn't that so sad? Don't you care about them? Don't you care about them and their relationship? Episode 19 is Dr. franxx's backstory. It literally does not matter. Nothing in this episode matters. Dr. franxx goes through some horrible tragedies because he experimented on his own fiancée for some reason, and then he becomes obsessed with the Clockstar Princess after she beat the shit out of him, and like, same. But was that really necessary? Did we need an entire episode for this? You guys have like 4 episodes to wrap this up, by the way, and the gang sure is confronting Ape. Like, Ape has been established as anything other than spooky, ominous figures that say ominous things at the start of a few episodes. Episode 20 is like everyone suiting up for some kind of grand epic battle on Earth. The organization of Ape, aka Papa, because he's the only one who is actually brought up in the story before episode 19, are actually aliens from space called Verm, who want to destroy the planet. Uh-oh. The Klaxosars are actually the good guys, just trying to defend their planet. But do we care about this? No, because the Clockstar Princess kidnapped Hero to use his soul energy or whatever, so we have to fight them and the alien since that's cooler or something. Next episode time. So in episode 21, everyone is fighting the final epic grand battle. The Clockstar Princess has Hero captive or whatever, and honestly, she's right. Nothing she did was wrong. She was absolutely correct to say f the humans for killing her people, and her controlling Hero is only the wrong thing to do because she should be controlling someone more worthy instead. Like me. Anyway, we learn more about the Nines, but it's too late for any of us to care about them because none of them are characters. And then 02 and the Clockstar Princess, aka 01, use their combined powers to make Verm, the space aliens, remember the space aliens, to make the space aliens retreat with the power of the big giant robot. Also, she learns the power of love and then dies in the lamest way possible. And 02's regular body T-poses to Mars. But don't worry about all that, because in episode 22, we learn that Kokoro is pregnant. Whoa! 02 is still fighting her heart out on Mars, but no one seems to understand that, so they spend the episode fretting and upset about it until Hero realizes that her brain is still fighting on Mars. So everyone decides to go to Mars. Oh, except Mitsuru, because he's staying behind with Kokoro, because she's pregnant. Remember, she got pregnant, you guys? It was like a really big deal. Also, they still have amnesia. It's episode 23 now, and we're all going to space. Hey guys, don't you think it's a little late for the sudden mech transformation to those space mechs? There's like 1 episode left. Hero climbs into his giant robot wife, and she uses the power of love and their combined hive mind consciousness to transform herself into a giant wedding wife, who probably is still mostly a robot but has like a human face and human titties. Then they all decide that this fight is too hard, so the rest of Squad 13 should go home so Hero and 02 can carry a bomb through a wormhole to blow up the Verm home planet instead. Episode 24 is the final episode, and most of this episode is 02 and Hero clipping across the screen for literally 2 years. In the series, it's 2 years. They clip through space for 2 full years. The power of love and friendship resonates from space to their friends they left back on Earth for 2 years. So they all go out to the 02 statue in the field and they all hold hands and cry and send 02 their energy so that she can safely clip into the planet and explode with the bomb, killing both her and Hero. So, what the f*** happened here? Now, I think it's obvious why Darling in the Franxx simply did not work as a series. The second half is a mess. I can't even summarize it in a way that takes it seriously because it is literally impossible to take seriously how many stupid plot twists they try to cram in there. It reaches absurd levels of forced drama that just make me laugh at every opportunity meant to be meaningful or impactful or emotional or, God forbid, sad in any way. Look at 02 as she goes ass up catatonic to Mars. The first time I saw this, I cried. I cried laughing. So that's the first issue. They spend so much time on the Mitsuru and Kokoro baby subplot that they had no time for anything else. It's the usual bad anime staple of they spread themselves too thin on too many side plots, so everything ends up feeling rushed. They had so many interesting themes and concepts set up at the beginning of the series that they disregarded entirely. It was like they were trying to say something about love and even gender with the Nines, and sexuality with Ikuno, but they never bothered to follow up on any of it. It's simply never mentioned again, as it gets drowned out by the Kokoro and Mitsuru subplot, and then the anime has to rush to go to space. I think the worst part is that it just doesn't feel earned. Let's look at Gurren Lagann for a staple trigger formula series to compare it to. Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann is a perfect spiral upwards of stake and scale that builds on itself as the series goes on. The world and characters grow along with the story until the jump to space just feels like a natural progression. Of course they were always going to end up in space. It's a story of a boy trapped underground who wants to break through to see the sky. So it makes tons of thematic sense for him to go higher and higher until he's up in space, fighting for humanity with a giant galactic robot. But more than that, Gurren Lagann is a tale about human potential and the power of optimism and believing in yourself. How if the chance of success isn't 0%, it might as well be 100%. Of course they would go all the way to the ends of the universe to prove just how strong that human potential really is. Okay, so why do the characters of Darling in the Franxx need to go to space? You could argue that the characters feel trapped in their little domes and that they want to protect the planet that they live on, but you could easily achieve that theme by just trying to restore the planet like they do at the end of the series anyway. This isn't really a story about human potential. It's a story about these specific characters as a coming-of-age story, and if you really want to stretch it, the power of love. You could argue that, sure, the power of love can transcend the stars, but even if Darling in the Franxx wants you to think that at times, at its core, it's really more of an interpersonal drama. The conflicts are mostly grounded and between the characters, with love triangles and unrequited love and even an LGBT plot thrown in haphazardly for good measure. The plot is based around the characters, and that makes it feel realistic, like you could see yourself being friends with them, which makes sense. At its core, it's a teenage coming-of-age story. But most of these characters don't even get a payoff or a satisfying end to their character arcs, because the story decides it's more important to take them to space, and then hastily tries to sum everything up with a time skip so the anime can tell us just how happy everyone is and how in love they all are without having to show it. Sure, Hero and Zero Two get a little bit of this, but Darling in the Franxx has an issue where it both wants to be a show with a huge ensemble cast and also have a full-on main character. You kinda can't have both. All it does is make Hero a kind of boring protagonist that doesn't get enough time to be fleshed out from the mopey loner guy, and it feels like the side characters get way too much attention. That's what the Mitsuru and Kokoro plot ends up being, like the writers concluded Zero Two and Hero's plot in the first 15 episodes, and then they just didn't know where to go from there. So Hero and Zero Two stall out into flat one-dimensional characters after episode 15, which is egregious for Zero Two, completely assassinating her character and taking away all of her aggressive, fun, flirty personality and making her act borderline childlike to show that she's better now. And the attempt to flesh out the rest of the characters in the later half of the series also falls completely flat, because the audience simply isn't given enough time to care about any of them prior to the shift in tone. The same is true for when the characters suddenly rush to space in literally the last 2 episodes of the series. It adds nothing to any of their characters. They get to show off their cool space mech recolors, and then they all just decide that the fight is too hard, so they go home to wring their hands together while they wait for the actual protagonist to save the day. And the way they save the day is just a 2-year-long depressing and miserable journey across space just to crash into an alien planet and explode. It's not earned. It comes out of nowhere. And on top of that, the ending is just kind of depressing. It doesn't make you feel like you watched an uplifting battle of humanity against space aliens trying to destroy them. It makes you kind of feel tired. And Imaishi is really trying his hardest here with the final scene to make it feel cool and uplifting and dramatic, and like Hero and Zero Two are sacrificing themselves for everybody's sake, in what feels like an attempt to make the scene feel like Kitan's sacrifice from Gurren Lagann, but it just ends up feeling completely hollow. They spend 2 years floating and fighting their way through space while Hero slowly dies of starvation, only to power up at the very end and explode themselves to death. What does this ending add to the series other than making it just disappointing to watch, and making you, the viewer, feel kind of bad about it? They try to pull it back with the main characters spinning off into the afterlife together, destined to reincarnate, but what about everyone they left behind? It doesn't really feel uplifting, it doesn't feel triumphant, it just kind of feels pathetic. And to me, it really feels like the space alien plot was shoved in last minute because it's a series partially by Trigger. So it had to involve the characters going to space. It's a mecha show by Trigger Studios. Don't you guys remember Gurren Lagann? As far as callbacks go, Promare does this better in literally an hour and a half. Not to mention all the dropped plotlines that never get resolved, because they were part of the interpersonal drama part of Darling in the Franxx that gets shoved aside for a ham-fisted space plot instead. Like, remember when Mitsuru was maybe gay for Hero and they just kind of float around in a pool together and Mitsuru forgets about it because he has a GF now? Remember how Kokoro and Ikuno swapped partners in the first place? They had a whole theme going about love and what love means and what kind of love can pilot a mech or whatever. What about Stampede Mode? What was that all about? Well, the manga actually addresses all of this. And I'm even gonna put a spoiler warning here, because genuinely, if you are a fan of Darling in the Franxx and wish it was better, please go read this manga. It does everything that the anime did not, and is a better written story. I'm gonna go more into depth as to why this is, but to do that, I do need to spoil what the manga does that makes it so good. So seriously, go read it. I'll still be here when you get back. Just know that it's... the manga does have one immediately glaring issue, and it's that the author really liked titties. He really liked titties, bazongas, giant breasts. So just be aware, you'll be seeing a lot of naked anime girls. Please be mature about this. I trust you all, okay? This story is worth it, I swear, but don't go around reading this where anyone else can see it. Anyway, if you do actually want to read the manga in all of its big-breasted glory, skip to the timeline below to get to the next part of the video, and you can come back here after you've read it. So, the manga changes a lot about the story while keeping most of the early story beats the same, with small but meaningful changes to character actions that make it feel like they have more agency in their own story. It makes a lot of big moments that kinda came out of nowhere in the anime actually feel like the characters are involved and making their own choices, rather than just existing and having things happen to them. In a story based around Squad 13 and their development as people, it makes everything feel a lot more impactful to each character arc, not just Hiro and Zero 2. The plot of the manga is essentially just episodes 1 through 15 expanded upon and embellished with some of the good parts from the second half of the anime. The main antagonist remains the Klaxosar princess from beginning to end, and she even gets a mech design of her own to fight against the Alpha Squadron in. They don't introduce the aliens or Verm or space battles or whatever outside of the Klaxosar princess's backstory to make her feel a little bit more sympathetic, so the manga keeps the story grounded about Squad 13 protecting their planet. An early change that is pretty indicative of how the manga handles the series is the scene with Goro and Ichigo, where the Delphinium mech gets stuck inside of the goo monster or whatever and can't get out. In the anime, Goro ejects Ichigo to save her and then decides to die slowly until he can kamikaze the mech and kill the Klaxosar. But in the manga, it's Ichigo who ejects Goro out of the mech. And her reasoning for it is that it's her fault as squad leader that they failed, and that she should take responsibility for the people that she's in charge of. I like this change. I think it gives Ichigo a lot more agency, and adds more to it than Goro ejecting Ichigo because he's in love with her. It also makes it feel more like she's making a decision rather than having a thing happen to her. I also like this change because it means the manga gets to utilize the criminally underused Stampede mode. Each mech, when only run by the girls, has a secondary monster form that it can go into called Stampede mode. In the anime, this is only ever used by Zero 2. The other girls never get to use it. But in the manga, they use Stampede mode way more. And it's an interesting take on the dynamic between Ichigo and Goro. He gets to rescue her and then confess his feelings after fighting to calm her down from Stampede mode, and it makes the entire scene feel more tense and like each character gets to add something to the story, rather than Goro ejecting Ichigo because he's a simp and then sadly confessing to her at the end of the episode. And speaking of cuck plots, the plot between Ikuno, Mitsuru, Kokoro, and Futoshi is way less of an actual, NTR Dojin cuck plot. Well, I mean, it's still there, but, it's a little bit more nuanced. For starters, Ikuno and Futoshi actually talk a lot more in the manga, and seem to understand what is happening with Mitsuru and Kokoro before even they do. The two of them reach the conclusion on their own that Mitsuru and Kokoro should try riding the mech together, and the partner swap is their request, rather than Kokoro requesting it out of the blue and shattering Futoshi's heart in the worst way possible by breaking her promise to him to stay together forever, or whatever. This way, he actually gets a little bit of agency in this plot, rather than serving as the guy who just gets cucked and then has to accept her choice. It's way less, it makes him feel a lot more like a character, and it lets Mitsuru feel more like a character too. Does come at the expense of, the confession scene where Ikuno confesses her love to Ichigo takes place in the shower, and they're both naked. But I swear the manga has a better story, guys. Okay, I'm trying to explain it right now. Okay, let's all be mature about this. Speaking of gay subplots, the plot where Mitsuru wants to pilot a mech with Hiro also gets resolved too. Near the end of the series, Mitsuru and Kokoro are the ones who carry Hiro up to Zero 2, so they do get to ride in a mech after all, and Mitsuru forgives him. No stupid memory loss plot required. And later on in the series, Kokoro's mech powers up and sheds the outer coat to give her a light mode, and Kokoro also gets to engage in Stampede mode. And the design of her mech Stampede mode is honestly the best one so far. Look, it's like a dragon. It's really cool. The Nines also get to be actual characters in the manga, getting an entire chapter where they fight the Klaxosar princess after she reveals herself and her own cool mech design. And while they do all still die, they don't die randomly sacrificing themselves to aliens after a random face heel turn, and instead died in a fun fight scene that establishes how powerful the Klaxosar princess is as a villain. The only Nines to survive end up being Delta and Alpha, with Delta in a coma and eventually becoming the host for the Klaxosar princess instead of Hiro, while she snoops around Squad 13's base. because Squad 13 actually decides to take pity on the 2 remaining 9s and shelters them. It's Kokoro's idea, and again this gives her agency rather than just deciding she wants to have a baby, and she insists that they protect Alpha and Delta despite the fact that they should be exterminated or whatever for failing in their duties. Alpha then becomes sort of an anti-hero supporting character in his own right, as he learns to accept Squad 13's kindness towards him and even helps them out when they have questions about what they're fighting and why the world is the way that it is. He has a full-on redemption arc. He also loses an eye and puts a scarf on, and it's a really good design. I love him. Near the end, he also gets his own mech that he pilots with Delta, a modified version of the 9 squad mechs, and it's also a really cool design. He still ends up sacrificing himself in the final battle for 02, but he gets development with her first through the rest of the manga, and he doesn't just appear out of nowhere with a sudden change of heart because 02's wedding mecha outfit was so powerful and the power of love brainwashed him, or I don't know, I don't remember what their stupid justification was. Finally, look at this cute ending art. 02 and Hiro getting to stay behind with their friends and grow up is such a better ending for 2 characters whose narrative arc revolves around them wanting to understand the people around them and be understood in return. They're outcasts and they want the people that they love to know who they are as people. In the manga, they don't go off to die alone and get to join in with the others as they rebuild the planet and have happy, normal lives with the rest of the squad. And I think for 02 especially as a character, this is a way better ending for her than dying pathetically out in space. Darling in the Franxx wanted so badly to be an anime about characters that make meaningful connections and relationships with each other, only to flush it all down the toilet with the ending. The manga does so much better with every single character and makes it feel like an ensemble story where each character has their own part to play. And a lot of stuff is the same. The plot with Hiro and Ichigo in 02 and Kanagoro plays out loosely the same, so the manga managed to keep the good, fun stuff from the original and just elevated it. It makes me sad that we'll never see this version of Darling in the Franxx animated, but I guess I'm glad that there's a version of the series out there somewhere that does manage to do a pretty good ending. Anyway, it's like 60 chapters, so if you were a fan of Darling in the Franxx at all, you should go read it and let me know what you thought. Was it truly as good as I thought it was, or did you prefer the way the anime handled it? Let me know in a comment down below. I'd love to discuss any thoughts you had about the anime or the manga. Anyway, to bring this back around, Darling in the Franxx started out as a series that could have had a lot of promise, but the anime just really couldn't stick the landing. It feels to me like they hit the climax of Hiro and 02's relationship in episode 15 and then had absolutely no idea where to go after that. So they just kind of meandered around until they decided that enough time has passed where they were allowed to go to space. It's an absolute mess of a series that drops anything interesting in favor of an attempt at spectacle and nostalgia baiting that doesn't hit anywhere near the notes of its predecessors, and honestly is kind of insulting in the ways that it tries. I think Trigger Studios is capable of a lot of great work, and their original movie Promare and their recent Dungeon Meshi adaptation has definitely proven that. I don't know what happened behind the scenes to make Darling in the Franxx such an obviously unplanned mess, but we can all at least agree on one thing, right? It was probably A1 Pictures' fault.